Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Was Adopted by Medusa. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was late at night, in a certain church. One Maka and her partner Soul, a Meister and weapon team, were in the middle of a fierce duel with a strange pink-haired individual. Her was black as night, and she had a strange blade that made a high-pitched scream which would disorient the two. Unknown to Maka, her partner had been infected by the unusual black that came from the pink-haired person. The blonde girl and her scythe partner were being pushed against the wall. The blade was cutting through Soul's weapon form, and she didn't want to risk her partner despite his insistence. Suddenly a sharp clap sound occurred from the church rafters, and a voice spoke, "That is enough, Krona. I expected better from you." The person addressed as Krona backed away from Maka. Their posture screamed submission and at the same time endearment. Sorry Oni-sama. I'm so sorry. From the shadows emerged a young blonde man with a lollipop in his mouth. He had blue eyes, whisker-like birthmarks on his cheeks. He was wearing a gray muffler around his neck, a gray t-shirt underneath a black trench coat, beige pants, and brown wing-tipped shoes. He rolled the candy around in his mouth, then spoke, "Now Krona, you shouldn't be apologizing to me. Say you're sorry to the nice girl and her partner whom you so grievously injured." At this, Krona gulped, then turned towards the Meister and weapon duo, bowed and spoke, "I'm very sorry for hurting you both. There, that wasn't so bad. A little sister now then, introductions are in order. The name's Naruto Uzumaki Gorgon. At your service. This little rascal is my adorable little sister Krona. Isn't she cute?" he spoke at the end while pinching the pink-haired girl's cheeks. She whined out in pain, "Oni-sama, don't pinch my cheeks, I don't like it." He chuckled, then released her from his grip and spoke, "Sorry. You're just too adorable." Tears leaked from her eyes as she sniffled, "You're mean, Oni-sama." In the background, the Meister and weapon pair sweat dropped at siblings' antics. "The hell is wrong with them?" asked Soul with a blank expression, to which Maka replied, "No clue." The blonde man then turned to them with a smile again. "Sorry for any trouble Krona caused you, Meisterson. Now please excuse us, we have an appointment we can't afford to miss." He spoke, which made the lollipop stick move about in his mouth. Maka glared at him and spoke, "We can't let you two go anywhere." In response, her partner said with a grin, "Damn right. Injured or not, it wouldn't be cool if you got away." At their statements, Naruto gave the candy in his mouth a firm and scratched the bridge of his nose. "Now that's no good. Trust me when I say, if you pick a fight with me, then you're gonna have a bad time. Still, if you insist, I suppose I can entertain you for a few moments." He spoke with a grin, then his right eye changed to an ethereal purple glow. Play Undertale Lost, Megalovania. A sharp whizzing sounded through the air. On instinct, Maka leaned her head to the side in defensive reflex. A sharp object cut her cheek, making leak down the side of her face. When she turned, she saw that it was some kind of bone embedded in the locked doors behind her. "Krona, stand aside please." The blonde man spoke, making his sister nod as she backed away. The Meister grit her teeth and charged the whiskered man in front of her. He grinned wider and clenched his fist hard enough to make his nails draw. Black. Soon the black coated his hand, and when Maka swung her side downward, he blocked the blow with his coated fist. Sparks flew about the church as a horrid scraping sound occurred from the clash. Naruto's eye glowed brighter as an invisible force made Maka fly upward, then come slamming back down on the floor. She tried to get up, but then she flew in all directions, crashing against the floors, walls, and ceiling. She spat up as Soul tried to urge her to fight on. She nodded and acknowledged and decided to use soul resonance to defeat the strange blonde man. Sensing what she was about to do, he grabbed a candle holder and removed the top part holding the illuminated candles. He coated it, then the top part grew a blade. Using his black, he changed an ordinary candle holder into a halberd. He gave her a come and get me motion of his hand, making the green-eyed girl scowl. Her weapon partner, Soul, glowed brightly as they achieved soul resonance and came at the blonde with intent to kill. However, he grinned as he snapped his fingers, and two skulls that has the resemblance to a certain multi-tailed kitsune appeared and fired beams of black energy with crimson outlines. The attacks shot at her legs and made Maka misstep, causing Witch Hunter to be used too soon, making it harmlessly fly past the blonde man. He appeared in front of her in a blur of motion and slammed the blunt end of his makeshift halberd into her gut, and saliva spilled from her mouth as she was sent flying out the doors of the church. She rolled and skidded across the ground. She slid to a halt and clutched her stomach, thinking that a few of her ribs were either cracked or broken. When she glanced upward, she saw her opponent flying downward, the blade of his halberd pointing down at her. She gulped, thinking that this was the end, but when the blade slammed down and the sound of impact occurred, she felt like her heart was going to fly out of her chest. She slowly turned her head and noticed the blade was only inches away. Standing on top of the blunt end of the halberd was Naruto with a shit-eating grin. He had dunked on. He spoke while forming the victory sign. Music. He chuckled and said while dismounting from his perch, "That was fun, Meisterson, but I must be going now, especially since the fuzz has just arrived." And on cue, Dr. Stein in Spirit Albarn, in his weapon form, arrived. "Sorry, but we aren't letting you leave," spoke Stein while smoking a cigarette. The whiskered team merely clapped his hands and spoke calmly, "I tried cigarettes, you know. But I hate the taste. Messes with my taste buds. That's why I prefer candy and sweets. Anyway, much as I'd love to stay and play, I have already used up all of my time with Meisterheim. See you folks around with that. He turned on his heel and walked back into the church where his sibling waited, and he audibly spoke, "Come on sis, I know a shortcut." His voice echoed out of the church, making spirits say that kid does know the only way out is through the front door. Right at this, the doctor HM'd to himself and entered the church, only to find it empty. "The hell, how'd he do that? We were right behind him," yelled Spirit in surprise, wondering how they'd been given the slip. Stein merely turned the screw in his head and spoke, "Seems that kid has a few tricks up his sleeve." "Shortcut, huh? How interesting." Meanwhile, sitting on a broomstick is a certain blonde witch, her eyes glaring down below as she muttered to herself, "Damn that Naruto brat. Always doing whatever the hell he wants. But I can't deny his results." With a chuckle, she snapped her fingers and flew off into the night. Later, in another part of the world, "Amoni-sama, how did we get here?" asked Krona as she and her brother walked through the Hokage Tower's halls. At that, her brother replied, "Simple. We took a shortcut," the shark-like grin never leaving his face. At this point, Ragnarok in his chibi form appeared from her back and planted himself on top of Krona's head and spoke. "What this idiot means to say is, how did we get from the insides of a church then here to the Hokage Tower on the other end of the world in less than a minute?" Naruto chuckled and replied casually, "Way to cut it short." "Badum tsh." At this, the demon blade replied in a blank tone, "That pun was horrible and you know it." The blonde merely shrugged and knocked on the Hokage's office. A feminine voice replied with a gruff, "Come in." With a smile, both Krona and Naruto entered the Godame's office. The blonde Hokage was currently doing paperwork, with Shizune making sure that Tsunade didn't sneak off to drink or gamble. The Sannin looked up and was relieved to see the Gorgon siblings. Since her inauguration as Hokage, and since the two fought off and nearly killed Orochimaru's number 2 during their last encounter, the two immediately became Tsunade's go-to shinobi when she wanted results. Escort a daimyo in disguise as an actress done. Rebuild bridges with Suna through the Kake's children done. Recover the Kiba blades and return them to Kiri done. That last one was practically a coup, but that's a story for another time. Naruto-kun. What might I do for you? Civilians giving you trouble, I'll have them arrested. Shops refusing to sell goods to you, they'll be shut down. Or maybe you want to be transferred out of your current team, she asked with a wave of her hand. During the aftermath of the fight with Orochimaru, Naruto and Tsunade struck a powerful bond, more particularly when she realized just who Naruto's real mother was. She couldn't officially tell him who his mother was yet, while enemies of Uzu still lived and breathed inside Konoha. But he had the same posture, the same devil-may-care attitude, and the same penchant for getting results. If he needed something to happen, then she got it done with no questions asked. She owed him that and more. She was still puzzled why he hadn't asked for Jiraiya beheaded or for a team transfer. But she thought that he might be waiting to perform the former on his own terms, and the latter. He might be waiting for the team to tear itself apart. With a smile, the blonde teen spoke, "I am here because I intend to initiate a deep cover mission." At this, the Sannin and her assistant raised their eyebrows, with the former asking, "What do you mean?" The whiskered teen pulled down the gray muffler, revealing a certain mark that has been the bane of a certain Konoha's existence. Tsunade's eyes narrowed dangerously as she asked, "How long have you had that?" The boy covered the curse mark again and replied, "About the same time as Sasuke got marked. Tried to pull the pasty-faced pedo off the Uchiha, then he tried to bite me. I used my black to harden the arteries in my neck. Barely broke the skin. In short, this beauty mark is just for show. Though Orochimaru doesn't know that." A pregnant pause filled the air as Shizune asked, "Naruto-kun, what are you saying?" The whiskered teen chuckled casually and replied, "Think about it. An opportunity to go after Orochimaru and his curse mark bearers all in one go." A spark filled the slug Sannin's eyes. She knew killing Orochimaru would be pointless if he simply revived himself through the thrice-damned mark. What Naruto was proposing was pure genius and absolutely dangerous. However, the pros easily outweighed the cons by far. Getting rid of that snake in the grass would kill off a lot of problems that might fester in the future. She smirked and spoke in a sarcastic tone, "So you do care for Konoha?" Naruto's eye flashed an ethereal purple as he replied, "Hardly, but getting rid of Orochimaru now will prevent numerous complications in my plans. I like to think of this as a long-term investment." The Sannin nodded and spoke in a tone of authority. "Understood. I declare this as an SS rank mission. Your goal is to infiltrate Orochimaru's organization and eliminate him and his followers by any and all means necessary. This mission shall be highly classified and known only to myself and Shizune or any other depending on necessity. But I must warn you, once you embark on this mission there's little I can do for you. I shall keep you from being declared a missing man and keep you and your sister out of the bingo books. Otherwise my assistance shall be quite limited." Naruto nodded in understanding and replied in a serious tone, "That's fine. But I must give you fair warning. I cannot guarantee the safety of any wood rescuers come to save me." The Hokage squeezed her hands slightly, but she knew he was right on that point. "Very well, I shall delay deployment as long as I can. Should there be complications, I shall take full responsibility." The blonde nodded and spoke, "Come on, Krona. Let's go." The pink-haired sibling nodded and asked her brother Oni-sama, "How are we going to find Orochimaru?" As they exited the Hokage Tower, the blonde replied with a smile, "We don't have to. He'll find us." Meanwhile, hidden within the Forest of Death, a blonde woman is sitting in a clearing. However, she is sitting on a broomstick. This is Medusa Gorgon, mother of Krona and adoptive mother of Naruto, inventor of the black, and middle sister of the Gorgon family. She smirked slightly as she spoke. "Ah, you both came. How exciting." At this statement 2 more females appeared. One was a woman with black hair holding a glass of wine, this was a Gorgon. And the second had hair in the shape of a scorpion's tail, she is Gorgon. Respectively, they were the elder and younger of the siblings, with Medusa herself being the middle sibling. These were the Gorgon sisters, a trio of infamous witches that were so dangerous they were hunted by Death's Meisters and by the witch community. Shala clasped her hands and giggled, all 3 of us in the same place, that's a surprise. Arak cast a chilling glare in Medusa's direction and spoke, I trust that there is a reason you invited us both here. Medusa smiled. She knew Arak bore a grudge for her being left to fend for herself against death, but she knew her summons would pique the interest of her sisters. Her smile grew wider as she spoke, I asked for you here, so we might form an alliance. As fellow witched and sisters, once again, the 2 gave their blonde sibling a skeptical look, with Shala asking, this isn't like you, Medusa. What brought this on? The serpent witch chuckled darkly and spoke, I did it. I found the perfect host for the black, God's natural enemy. Arak nearly did a spit take on her wine while the younger sister's jaw dropped. You mean to say you have someone from the Uzumaki clan, the clan hailed as God's natural enemy, nearly yelled the eldest sister. The middle sister chuckled and explained, indeed I do. It is quite a story. Flashback 6 years ago. What a shithole, muttered the blonde witch as she surveyed Konoha from her flying broom. This village always put a bad taste in her mouth, filled with a sense of superiority and hypocrisy. She was more than old enough to have seen this village be built from the ground up. She even had met the Senju brothers so long ago. Hashirama. She couldn't tell if he was an imbecile or the most heartless man in the world for giving away the Jinchuriki as peace offerings. But musing about an obsolete and bygone era was not her purpose. She was here to find a certain someone that could help further her research on the black. Her daughter Krona adapted well to the first generation of the black. The second generation, however, proved problematic. Unlike the first generation, which was entirely artificial, the second generation came from a template, a donor. There was extracted then converted to black. The results were invaluable. However, the second generation proved to be highly unstable. Subjects injected with it would almost immediately go into spasms, random and violent mood swings, followed by total insanity, and finally seizures and death. The longest any of her subjects lasted was 7 minutes. It was clear she needed something a cut above the rest. Something or someone special. Her attention was caught by a series of faint chanting. She looked down and observed a lynch mob had formed and they were threatening to hang some kid. Yet another example of the kind of cesspool this godforsaken village was. And to top it off, there were Anbu who were watching. She observed the boy kicking and struggling then. He smirked and said to them, if you don't let go, then you're all gonna have a bad time. The tone of confidence in his voice and his now relaxed posture caught the witch's attention. The mob laughed at the boy, and without warning several members of the mob were skewered on what appeared to be a tail. A tail made from Biju chakra, Medusa sensed. The mob members fled in terror, not expecting the Kyuubi brat to fight back like that. As for the Anbu, they had conveniently left when they believed the blonde would be hanged. The blonde then retracted the tail and used it to cut the noose that was threatening his life. When he landed smoothly on the ground, the tail dissipated into thin air. That's pretty hard to do, he mumbled as he stretched his arms out. Getting more and more curious, the witch flew down to greet the boy, taking note the Anbu had already fled. Good evening, my child, she spoke, putting on a mask of kindness. He turned to her, a smirk on his face as he replied, good evening to you as well. You here to hang out, Badam TSH? She grimaced as she replied that was a horrible pun. And you seem rather nonchalant after nearly being hanged by a lynch mob. He merely shrugged and answered that was a lynch mob, even if it was only a half-hearted attempt. At best, she sweat-dropped at his seemingly carefree attitude and asked, don't you even care? At that he cracked a large grin and replied, sure I do. But this kind of thing is pretty normal. Happens all the time. But their time will come. She smirked in a malicious manner as she spoke. You must be referring to that Biju tail you used. Aren't you worried that they'll report your misuse of your Jinchuriki abilities? He shrugged again and replied, what misuse? Maybe I did it unconsciously in a last-ditch attempt to save myself. Hokage can't do anything in that case. Messing around with my seal could invoke consequences I'm sure he wouldn't want. She chuckled and then asked him, you seem like an interesting boy. What if I could give you the power to take revenge? In response, he replied with a large grin, then color me interested. What is it? She smiled darkly and spoke in kind tone, I'll show you. Come with me. In response to her statement, he casually spoke, you wouldn't be planning to have your way with me, would you? I like older women and all, but I didn't peg you for a pedo. Her face flushed at what he was obviously implying and spoke while trying to maintain her composure, no, of course not. Besides, it wouldn't matter anyway since I'm some centuries old. She cursed herself for letting that slip, making the young boy speak with a shark-like grin. Centuries, a time must be kind to witches. How did you know? She screamed at her fellow blonde, to which he answered, educated guess since you flew on a broom. She sweat-dropped at the stereotype, but it proved true in her case since she did fly on such a thing. She chuckled and then, taking the boy's hand, flew off into a part of the forest of death. They landed in front of a grown-over cave entrance. It was thick with moss and vines. It was rather difficult to push through, but it made for a good natural camouflage. As they traversed deeper and deeper inside, the stony cave walls and floors were replaced by cool metal flooring. The Jinchuriki took note of the new surroundings and asked, "This yours?" She waved off his question by replying, "Not mine. I didn't build it. I just happened to find this place and made it my laboratory. From my findings, it used to be one of some Orochimaru fellow's illegal laboratories. It was left abandoned after he went rogue, but it proves useful." Naruto nodded in acknowledgement as they stopped in the main lab. Inside was a small pink-haired girl in a little black dress, looking at a simple picture book of ways to kill people. "Krona, my child, we have a guest." The girl looked up from her book and swiftly hid her face behind it, muttering a simple hello. The blonde boy gave her a friendly wave and spoke, "So what's this power you mentioned?" The witch grinned slightly and replied, "Direct hi like that. You don't waste any time." One moment, she disappeared into one of the back rooms, then returned with a vial of a thick black liquid in her hand. "This is black, a weaponized that can harden or soften according to the user's will. It also possesses some healing properties such as hardening to close off wounds. It can be shaped into weapons and armor as well. Krona there possesses the first generation. This, however, is the second generation, but no one has ever survived assimilating it into their stream." At this, the whiskered boy merely grinned and spoke, "I don't really care about any of that. I only care if it makes me powerful, so hit me with the juice. If I die, that's fine. I'd rather die on my own wishes than die for somebody else's ambitions." At that last line, number of people, both living and dead, shivered in dread. A look of awe crossed on Medusa's face. She had specifically warned him of the dangers, and he didn't truly care for the consequences so long as he got power for his own goals. This one is interesting, she thought with dark glee. "What's your name, Bauya?" she asked with a smile, already suspecting his true nature. With a large grin he replied, "The name's Naruto Uzumaki, the man who shall turn the world upside down." When he finished his introduction, lightning dramatically struck and thundered across the sky. With a satanic grin, Medusa filled a syringe with the second generation and injected it into the boy's body. He winced at the needle puncturing his skin. His pupils grew and shrank as the black assimilated into his body. All at once his body felt like every molecule had been set on fire, doused, then relit again and again as his immune system tried to fight off the black. He broke into a cold sweat, but he stayed as still as he could, his body shaking from the effort of not screaming. Finally, his immune system stopped fighting against and accepted it as a natural part of his body. He sighed in relaxation and relief and uttered, "Give me sugar." Medusa raised an eyebrow at the request and theorized that the boy's craving for sugar might be from the black doing something to his metabolism. She wordlessly reached for a jar of lollipops that she kept for Krona when she did well during her training and gave the boy one. He ripped off the wrapper and stuck the pop inside his mouth. His body seemed to relax, then his face resumed his lackadaisical demeanor. "Welp, that was interesting. What happens now?" She smirked and brought forth a cage containing small rabbits. She placed it in front of the boy and spoke in a cold manner, "Your training begins, of course. Kill them." Naruto was silent for a few moments, staring down at the bunnies. Their noses constantly twitching, one shook its head making its ears flap about. Naruto then gave his response, "Don't want to." The sound of glass shattering went through Medusa's mind. Krona hid her face behind the picture book, knowing what happens when her mother is disobeyed. "What did you just say?" the witch asked in a menacing tone, her expectations of the boy failing at his blatant refusal. The blonde boy's eye then glowed an ethereal purple color as he replied, "Let me rephrase that. I don't want to kill anything weaker than me." Once again, the sound of glass shattering was heard in the witch's mind. Her anger and disappointment evaporating to confusion, she stood silent, her mouth hanging open as she gawked at the boy. What was the only intelligent question that she could think of? The whiskered boy ate on the lollipop in his mouth and spoke, "From my understanding, you wanted to use me as a test subject for your experiments on the black. And to further your research, I must get stronger, which coincides with my own goals. However, I cannot become strong by killing things weaker than me." She bit her lip and crossed her arms. Suddenly, her grin stretched across her face again, threatening to tear her cheeks. Her expectations of the boy were now reaffirmed. That person had mentioned that the perfect subject would appear in Konoha, and here he was as promised. "Very well then, go out into the woods and kill the biggest animal you can find. Oh, here." The witch then handed him a small pearl that glowed in the light. "When you're done, crush this and I'll know where to find you," she explained, her eyes filled with anticipation. The Jinchuriki took it and replied while snatching another lollipop for later use, "Not a problem. See ya." He walked off and exited the lab, Krona waving goodbye to him shyly, while Medusa eagerly awaited the results. 2 hours later, Medusa sat in her laboratory, writing down notes about her research while speaking into a recorder to catalog her thoughts. "At last, I have found a compatible host for the second generation of black. Naruto Uzumaki, Q by Jinchuriki. When he first rejected killing those bunnies, I was severely disappointed. But then I was elated at how practical he was. Killing something stronger than himself would indeed further my research. Incidentally, I can accurately speculate why the black accepted him. It is." She was cut off as she felt the boy summoning her. "Already hasn't been that long," she muttered, but thought that he might have gotten lucky and found something to kill sooner. She stopped the recorder and flew off into the woods on her broom. She approached the spot where the pearl had been crushed, shards of it on the ground, broken like eggshells. She looked about but saw no signs of the boy. "Hey, Naruto, where are you?" she called out, and a loud thump sounded behind her. She slowly turned around. and saw a mountain lion with its back broken and its neck twisted at a full 180 degrees. Suddenly a loud crash occurred and she leapt up into the branches to gain a better vantage point. What she saw filled her with newfound glee. The boy was standing in a clearing, his fists covered in black, forming a type of armor. On the ground lie 3 bears, bleeding out from their crushed heads. One was groaning weakly, making an odd gurgle noises that sound like gibble gibble. The bear that still lived tried to get up, but the boy crushed its throat using his armored hand. He then heard a quiet giggle. He turned and grinned, spattered across his face as he spoke. Does this prove my point? Medusa smiled and gave a simple reply, welcome to the family. In flashback, both Arachne and Shala stood surprised by the story. The youngest of the siblings smiled darkly and spoke in a nonchalant manner. You have caught my attention, Medusa. I'm on board. I look forward to meeting him. Technically speaking, since you adopted him, that makes him our nephew. Arachne took a sip of wine, her eyes glaring at the middle sister. You have indeed piqued my interest. But you have crossed me before. I shall need more substantial evidence of the boy's promise before I invest in this. The blonde witch chuckled darkly and replied, you want to see his abilities firsthand? That can be arranged. I believe he shall do something that will rock these godforsaken elemental nations. Incidentally, Naruto Uzumaki, in another part of the village, was already enacting his own plans.